Video number 2, ladies and gentlemen, same basic idea. We're going to take the thematic review information, we're going to run that, and that's how we're going to work. Second theme, an increasingly pluralistic United States faced profound global challenges and sought to define its international role. To expand on that theme, global conflicts over resources, territories, and ideologies, renewed debates over the nation's values and its role in the world, while simultaneously propelling the U.S. into a dominant international military, political, cultural, and economic position. Hoo-ah! Hoo-ah! Okay. In other words, what are we supposed to do in the world? Is the United States supposed to be a power that gets involved in other countries, or are we not supposed to be that power? Let's look at different gradients of this. What does each of the following mean in terms of U.S. foreign policy? Isolationism. Are we supposed to be a nation that in essence trades with others, but when it comes to foreign policy, wars, diplomacy, that we stay out of the affairs of the world, like George Washington had told us that we should? Should we stay completely out of those affairs and deal only in business areas? Should we be imperialist? Should we plant some flags? Should we, the great United States, take some territory abroad, add it to the United States and say, we have an empire? How do you like it? Yeah, America. Okay? That's imperialism. Or should we be more interventionist? And there are different grades of this. Should the United States get involved in conflicts like a World War I or World War II, where we bring our military muscle in order to assure or help the victory of a power whose ideals we belong with, and then retreat from the field as best as possible, perhaps maintaining associations or allegiances, but not tying ourselves permanently to the involvement in those areas? Is that what we're supposed to do? Okay, so over time, we're going to see those policies sort of ripple in and out. Up until the period we pick up in 1898, the United States has been really isolationist. Okay, George Washington had recommended that we stay out of European affairs as much as possible. Okay. Number 2, where do we start here? Okay, how did each of the following contribute to America's desire for imperialism? Economic markets. We need places to sell things. And one of the best ways to do that is to have areas of the world that rely on American product. And so the United States believes it would be good for us as a nation to have as many associations with areas that we can. Let's have people who depend on us. Anglo-Saxonism. This is where things get a little bit touchy. The Americans believed that their civilization, waspy as it was, right? White Anglo-Saxon Protestantism was the greatest civilization ever conceived of by human beings, and that other people in other parts of the world deserved a chance to live by those rules as well. It's heavy stuff. Frontier thesis. Frederick Jackson Turner proposed in the 1890s that America had run out of frontier. And running out of frontier was a dangerous moment, because it, in essence, meant that the United States no longer had anywhere to go. We're a country that needs somewhere to go. We have to have a goal. We have to have a something we're aiming at. And if you remove that from us, there's the possibility that we're no longer going to have a direction, that we're not going to have someplace that we're headed. Also, Turner proposed that the frontier was important for a social valve, that it allowed us the opportunity to try and, as much as possible, push people who weren't happy with the civilization off to the edges of this continent every time that we could. Okay? Why did we end our isolationist ideals in 1898 to become an imperialist power? Okay? We did it really in order to achieve the goals that I just talked about right then. Okay, the Spanish-American War is the big event of the period. We get involved in the Spanish-American War because we're trying to protect the Cubans from humanitarian harm from the Spanish. Also because there are markets for sugar in Spain's possessions of Cuba and Puerto Rico, and the bombing of the U.S. Maine, or USS Maine. Keep in mind, we as Americans thought the Maine had exploded in Havana Harbor because the Spanish had blown it up. Remember the Maine, to bloop with Spain. Remember, that's the great motto of the Spanish-American War. So we have to go to war in order to avenge the Americans killed on the Maine. After the war is over, a very brief, splendid war, as Teddy Roosevelt called it, we take Puerto Rico and Guam. We set up an American-style government in Cuba and promised them that we're going to keep a close eye on them, but we don't allow the people of the Philippines the opportunity to conduct their own policies, and that's highly controversial. A lot of Americans believed that that was not fair, that the people of the Philippines should be allowed self-rule, and Americans disagreed. Explain how we demonstrated interventionism under Teddy Roosevelt's presidency, 1901 to 1909. So Teddy Roosevelt believed in big stick diplomacy, the idea that America should occasionally use its power in order to assure that the world got American ideals and American values. And if it was important to the U.S., that it was important then definitely to the Western Hemisphere and perhaps to the rest of the world as well. So in Panama, we involved ourselves in a dispute between Panamanian rebels and Colombia in order to help the Panamanian rebels to break away from Colombia. And once the Panamanian rebels were free, then they allowed us to build the canal there. The Colombians had not been willing to let us build a canal there. What does that show? That shows America using its force, using its strength, if you will, to make opportunities happen for us. Now, Teddy Roosevelt would tell you that the Panama Canal is an important part of the stability of the Western Hemisphere. It has to happen, and if Colombia stands in the way, they're standing in the way of progress. But what it really does is show that America is willing to intervene in places like Panama, if necessary, to grow our particular brand of American government. Roosevelt's corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. Roosevelt said to the countries of Latin America and the Caribbean, you're part of our hemisphere, you have to keep things steady, and if you don't, we're going to involve ourselves in your territories in order to set things straight. Now keep in mind, it's not a permanent U.S. presence. Normally it means the armed forces, and it means a period of time. Sometimes that's upward of 2 decades. But it doesn't mean we're planting flags. This is interventionism, not imperialism. We're not taking possession of Haiti. We're sending you troops so that you can stabilize your country, so that you're not a threat to the overall stability of the Western Hemisphere. Coke Zero, sponsor. Yeah, I wish. Okay, at the bottom of the page, we are asked about President Taft's foreign policy and how it was different from Teddy Roosevelt's foreign policy. Taft believes in dollar diplomacy. We should use American muscle not to make the world into sort of American-type governments that are loyal to America and view America as a model, but in order to open routes for American business. That's what we should do. Dollar diplomacy, according to Taft. Let's look at some World War I involvement. Why were we initially neutral during World War I? Well, we're neutral for a number of reasons. American exceptionalism. We kind of believe that this is a petty dispute that's beneath us. We shouldn't be involving ourselves in it. We're also neutral because we have a huge immigrant population, and picking any one side would have been a very difficult process for President Wilson, who knows what side we would have picked there. On top of that, we should also acknowledge that America is making very good money trading with both sides, particularly with the Entente side, with Britain and France. And staying on the fringe of the war allows you to continue to trade, while at the same time saying that people in the war, belligerents, have no right to shoot at you. What changed our policy from isolationist to interventionist? We changed as a result of the Zimmermann telegram and the increasing unrestricted submarine warfare of Germany. As the United States feels a threat from the Germans, we believe we have to get involved in order to stop the Germans from winning the war. Now, this is interventionism. We're not going to go to Europe again to plant flags. We're not attempting to take over territories. Wilson makes it clear that we seek no grander empire. We are but one of the many champions of mankind. We are here to make the world safe for democracy. And that is our goal, to establish a global order of democracy, because in that world, the United States can get along with all of the other states. How did Wilson's 14 points reveal his interventionist ideas? Now, Wilson doesn't see the United States taking over Europe, but he does see us becoming a dominant player in the League of Nations, an organization that rallies together the states and by collective security assures that people don't attack each other. Now, Wilson's 14 points also involve other things: the freedom of the seas, arms limitations, self-determination for all people. It's a broad notion of how the world can kind of get beyond warfare and move to a higher plane of being. Mock him if you like, but it's a fantastic set of ideas aimed at world peace and ending struggle. Might be a bit idealistic, but there it is. Why were many Americans, including the Senate, more isolationist? Because we're tired. We as a country have grown tired of the conflict and tired of the mess that is the war. We should have stayed out of it, many Americans thought at that time. And members of the Senate had not been consulted by Wilson. Wilson thought he would come home with the Treaty of Versailles, that he would drop it on the desk of the U.S. Senate, and the senators would just love it. And the Republicans who dominated the Senate basically threw it back at Wilson and demand changes. And Wilson was a stubborn, idealistic kind of a goat. He's not going to change anything. And by not changing anything, Wilson assures that the Senate will not ratify it. So the League of Nations exists, but we are not a part of it. And that immediately weakens it. Okay, Germany's not a part of it either. Neither is the Soviet Union, which is a new country. Kind of weak. Give examples of our isolationist, interventionist policies in the 20s and 30s. The United States tries to stay out of most affairs in the 1920s. We're trying to step back, if you will, and we'll talk about immigration restrictions in the next video. But what we're really trying to do is monitor what other countries are doing. We're part of naval agreements that commit nations to say we won't build any more than X amount of ships. We're part of the Dawes Agreement to scale down German debt and avoid war and clash in the 1920s. We also pass at home these neutrality acts that ban sales of weapons or loans to belligerents in the war. We're trying to avoid, as best as possible, involvement in the next skirmish, even when the specter of World War II seems looming as the rise of fascism takes place. America is looking at it, hoping we can avoid it. How did the events of the war and the war conferences thrust the United States into a greater world role during FDR's presidency and Truman's? Lend-Lease. Lend-Lease is a program where we're going to give, loan if you like, materials and goods to anybody who seems to be fighting for a cause that defends American ideas. It's a very interventionist idea. Anyone in the world who wants to follow our policies, we're going to help you out. We're even going to give money to people who you might think we shouldn't be giving money to, like the Soviet Union and our buddy Joe Stalin, Uncle Joe. Okay. The Atlantic Charter. In August of 1941, before the United States has technically entered World War II, Roosevelt and Churchill sit down and sketch out what the world is going to look like after the war. The liberties and the freedoms that the world will agree to after the war. And that's what the Atlantic Charter is. 3 conferences in a row, Tehran, Yalta, and Potsdam. At each of them, the United States sort of debates what is going to happen next in the war and then in the post-war world. At Tehran, the issue is the Second Front. Joe Stalin believes that the other allies in the war have been stalling. Stalling. See what I did there? It's not bad. Okay. That we need to get into the war more quickly. Now, we want to open up a second front in Europe. We just don't know quite where to do it. The agreement is made that within 6 months of that moment, that's November 1943, that the United States will open up a second front and begin waging a second front war, then pushing on Hitler from both sides, Stalin from the east, America, and the Allies from the west. Pardon me. At Yalta, by Yalta, February of 1945, the war is all but over. The conflicts now are becoming more clear. Big issues. Free elections for people of Eastern Europe. We technically are liberating the people of Eastern Europe from Nazism, and we should not be throwing them back into Joe Stalin's lap, allowing him to then use those societies as buffer states for himself. Now, Stalin commits to free elections in these places. That commitment is pretty light. We agree that we're going to have a post-war organization, the United Nations, that will be governed by the victors of the war, and that will also try and push for world peace. The Potsdam Conference is where things get chippy. By that point, Franklin Roosevelt has passed away. This is July of 1945. The new president, Harry Truman, armed with an atomic bomb midway through the conference, feels fairly confident throwing his weight around against Stalin. Stalin doesn't like it. He believes that he should be able to take the states of Eastern Europe without free elections. Truman calls him on it, and really the Cold War seeds already perhaps laid at Tehran and at Yalta begin to sprout for real at Potsdam. The atomic bomb drops. We dropped the atomic bombs on Japan in order to end the war more quickly, but if you're looking for a bigger theme, a lot of historians would say the reason we dropped the bombs is sort of to intimidate the Soviets, to show them that we have that kind of power, we're not afraid to use it. This whole video has been about the United States' role in the world. Should we be an interventionist power? Should we be an isolationist power? Should we sort of withdraw from the world, put up walls, and take care of America first? These are questions that still are kind of the dominant issues of American foreign policy today.